morning in store, where we'll share with you plans for the Gas Goes Green programme for the year, let you know what we'll be working on, receive your views, and let you know how you can contribute throughout the year. Been a number of very important policy developments since this advisory group last met. And we're going to begin today with a short panel discussion to set the scene for the year ahead. And pleased to be joined by BEI's colleagues for this. Then, as you can see on the agenda here, the Gas Goes Green team will share some updates on programme developments since we last met, before we then introduce the 2021 work streams and deliverables, joined by representatives from Cadent, National Grid, Northern Gas Networks, SGN, Wales and West Utilities. And then we finish the meeting with a presentation on the forward work programme for ENA's other major project, Open Networks. So hope you're looking forward to that. We certainly are keen to share our plans and talk through those with you. Before we go any further, I'd like to introduce Mikhail Stork, who'll be facilitating today's advisory group. Morning, Mikhail.
Good morning. Thank you, Tom. And I will be doing so together with my colleague, Lennart Sietsma. On the logistics of this call, I think we already had a couple of these calls, so most of you will be acquainted with it. Ultimately, the purpose is to get you up to speed with the plans of Gas Goes Green for 2021, and to get your input, your feedback. So as always, we would like this to be as interactive as possible, which means that for the interaction, please use the chat or virtually raise your hand, or just speak up to the extent that that doesn't create chaos. But all mechanisms is fine. Ultimately, we are aiming at getting your input and your questions. Important to say that this meeting is recorded, and we do that for the purpose that ENA puts it online. So please let us know now or directly after this meeting in case you would be uncomfortable with that. Otherwise, this recording will be put online on YouTube, so that others can also learn about Gas Goes Green. We start, as Tom said, with a panel, but before going there, good to say that the advisory group meetings for the rest of the year have been scheduled, and you can see the dates on the screen: in June again, in September, and in December. Let's go into the panel. We thought it would be nice to start with a half-hour panel discussion, which is kicked off by 3 speakers who each speak approximately 5 minutes. In these 5 minutes, differently than I said earlier, we are not looking to get your questions yet. Let's save these for the second 15 minutes and then have as many questions as possible. So please feel free to already put your questions in the chat. But I'll first ask the 3 speakers to give their vision, their take on 2021 and how that will look like for the green gases in the UK. And the first speaker we have is Chris Train. Chris is a former CEO of Cadent, British largest gas distribution network. He is spearheading ENA's Gas Goes Green programme as the UK's green gas champion. Has 37 years experience in working in the UK energy industry, also serving 7 years for the National Grid Network Operations as director, where he was responsible for the real-time running of Britain's energy network. During this period, he worked closely with industry and government to implement some of the most radical changes to Britain's electricity system since privatization. But Chris, what can you share with us on the trends you see on the transition towards green gas in the UK?
Thank you very much, Mikhail. Very flattered by the introduction there. But 2020 was a great year for hydrogen, I think. I believe it will go down as the year when hydrogen really took off in the energy sector around the world, from jet zero in our skies to high for heat in our homes. There's a growing consensus around the role that hydrogen has to play in meeting the wide range of energy needs in a net zero world and cracking some of the biggest challenges we face in that decarbonisation in order to achieve our goal. For our part, Gas Goes Green has established itself in the last 12 months as a leading source of industry learning, knowledge and expertise. And we'd like to thank stakeholders who have taken part in that. As you can see from the launch document, which Katie sent out on Friday and is officially launched today, we're looking to build on that work as we head further into 2021 and turn UK's hydrogen ambitions into reality. But a quick reflection on, so in this last year, in December, we had the Prime Minister's 10-point plan, and I'm sure my colleagues at BEIS will come on to that, and the long expected publication of the Energy White Paper. We had regulatory funding support for SGN's H100 project in Fife. We recently announced the launch in April of the world's first hydrogen home by Northern Gas Networks and Cadent. The site at Low Thornley, Gateshead, will offer the public an opportunity to experience the comfort of a net zero home. And I think that's one of the things that we've been missing in our toolkit, is the ability for people to see things in a practical home environment. And also in February, SR and Progressive Energy joined forces to announce the production of low carbon hydrogen at Stanlow for the HyNet project and the HyNet Northwest Industrial Cluster. So a busy year all in all, and all of our work in 2020 was very much focused on planning and research phase of our 6-step path to net zero. And you can see that pathway to net zero on the ENA website, and I'm sure Tom and Katie will put the link into the website if you onto the chat box rather, if you want a shortcut to finding that. This year we'll be continuing that, but in parallel we'll be taking first steps in the next phase and facilitating more connection of green gas. And what does this mean in practice? Well, it means we'll be finding new ways to connect more biomethane plants more quickly than before. It means that we'll start putting in place the right licensing arrangements to build the infrastructure to deliver hydrogen to Britain's industrial heartlands. And it means that we'll be looking at things like hydrogen connection agreements, which will allow hydrogen producers to bring their goods to market and easily and as speedily as possible, and working with all stakeholders in order to do that. But there's a bigger picture too. All of this work feed into, of course, one of the biggest challenges we face in society, and that's the need to reduce household carbon emissions by 95% in the next 30 years. And hydrogen and biomethane working in partnership with electricity are our best way of achieving that. And it's one of the features, I think, where we need to get stronger in terms of our representation through the Electricity Networks Association of this whole system approach to tackling the challenges. It's not an either or, it's a both. And by working together and collaborating, we can come up with the best answers for consumers. In the broadest sense, that we think that hydrogen in our homes will deliver a whole range of different benefits, from ensuring that the living room is warm at the coldest times of year, all the way up the supply chain in terms of creating green jobs and investments in new industries. So we're setting out more through tomorrow's Heat Today opportunity campaign. You've seen the launch document. Hopefully the team will put the link into the website so that you can see the digital hub and how that digital hub is going to help to inform people and give people the answers to the questions they have in their minds. So thank you, Mikkel.
Thank you, Chris. That was a very helpful and interesting introduction of what 2021 is about for Gas Goes Green. I think a transition like this needs active involvement of governments, and that's why we are happy to have also two speakers from the UK government, from BEIS. The first one being Nicolette Reeds, who leads the Future of Gas Strategy and Infrastructure team at BEIS. She's currently job sharing with Tatjana Bukar, who you might recognize as an advisory group member last year. Their work involves delivering on net zero governance, including the internal and external stakeholder engagement and future policy planning and coordination. Nicolette has been in civil service for 15 years now and has worked in a range of posts from central functions, frontline operations and policy roles. And prior to this, she worked for the United Nations and the European Commission. Nicolette, what can you tell us about what BASE is doing, mainly on hydrogen, if I am right?
Thank you, Michael. So obviously the white paper has set out a vision for the transformation of the energy system, which will transform our energy system from one which is 80% based on fossil fuel to one which enables the net zero economy. So this will see us changing how we heat our home and travel. It will lead to doubling how much electricity we use. It will also lead to how we fully decarbonize electricity generation by 2050, with a trajectory that will see us decarbonize power by the mid-2030s. Low carbon electricity will be a key enabler of our transition to a net zero economy, with demands expected to double due to the transport and low carbon heat. It drives forward as well, as Chris mentioned, the Prime Minister's 10-point plan commitments, which reaffirms how clean energy means in terms of job creation, but also the economic growth for the whole country. Moving on from COVID-19 to build a better UK, supporting green jobs and accelerate how our path to net zero will be. It also provides a package of measures to help households manage their energy consumption and keep bills affordable. The white paper also sets out that natural gas has an important and ongoing role to play in the future as we decarbonize our energy system. This does not mean that we're going to stop the use of natural gas, but means addressing the carbon dioxide and other greenhouse associated with its usage. There's several different ways of how we do this, but we cannot decarbonize in a way that risks our energy system and security or leads to disproportionate impacts on consumers across the UK. The gas market will need to evolve to ensure the right market and regulatory signals are provided to ensure a level of investment, but also maintenance throughout the transition to meet net zero by 2050. Low carbon hydrogen will be vital for meeting our legal binding commitments to achieving net zero by 2050, with potential to help decarbonize vital UK industry sectors and provide flexible deployment across heat, power and transport. So having said that, we will consult on updates to the Gas Act to ensure that we decarbonize gas supplies whilst continuing to provide the right price signal to market participants. Starting in 2021, through a series of workshops and consultation, we will work with network operators, suppliers and consumer group on the future of gas as we transition to a clean energy system. We will look at gas quality standards to enable the widest range of gases to be used to decarbonize energy. To facilitate this transition and development of the gas network, we'll also continue to work with the HSE to enable up to 20% hydrogen blending on the network by 2023, but this is subject to the success of testing and trials. We'll also work with Ofgem to remove distortions within the gas market, such as reviewing the domestic load connection allowance, which acts as a subsidy for extension to the gas grid. We will increase the production of biomethane on the gas grid, subject to outcome of the consultation. We'll expect the Green Gas Support Scheme to launch in autumn 2021 and run for 4 years. We'll also ensure that the institutional arrangements governing the energy system are fit for purpose for the long term, consulting in 2021 over organizational functions, including systems, operation, and energy code governance. So in terms of that, the government is planning a series of strategies and consultations. The ones mostly relevant to BES are the industrial decarbonization strategy, which is due to be published in March. And this will look to set out the government's vision for a prosperous low carbon UK industrial sector in 2050, but also working with the devolved administration partners, setting out how the low carbon transition can support industrial competitiveness and the green recovery across the UK. We'll also be launching another strategy on the heat and building strategy. My colleague Jane Lum, who is on the panel, will talk to you about this, but mainly it will set out the immediate actions which will need to be taken for reducing emissions from buildings. Then there's going to be the hydrogen strategy, which should be published before the summer, which will outline the government's ambition for UK hydrogen economy and set out the mere actions that need to be taken to ensure low carbon hydrogen can play a vital role in delivering net zero. Finally, in September, after the summer, hopefully we'll be publishing the net zero strategy, which will set out the path for transitioning to net zero economy, making the most of new growth and employment opportunity across the UK. In terms of calls for evidence, there's a cost affordability call for evidence, which will be looking at how energy users will pay towards the decarbonisation of the energy system through their bills and how this can be done fairly. There's going to be also a future of gas call for evidence, which myself and Tatiana Bucard are going to be leading on, which is going to look at what we need to do in order to decarbonise gas to meet the net zero target by 2050. And finally, a biomass call for evidence, which Jane is going to talk you through in a few seconds.
Thank you very much, Nicolette. I think that was a great introduction of what BES is doing in this field. Meanwhile, before introducing Jane, please, the encouragement from my side, if you have questions for either of the three speakers in this panel, please put them in the chat. Let's go to Jane. Jane Lump leads the non-domestic renewable heat initiative under the biomethane team at BES. This involves developing and delivering policies to reform the non-domestic renewable heat incentive, including COVID mitigation measures alongside closure of the scheme, and developing the new replacement scheme for biomethane, the Green Gas Support Scheme. Before taking on this role, Jane has worked on a wide range of energy and sustainability issues across central and local government. These have ranged from running operational energy and waste management teams, developing and delivering renewable energy policies, to business engagement in carbon reduction. Jane, what can you tell us mainly on biomethane, I believe?
Yes. Hello, everyone, and thank you for the invite today. So firstly, I'll just quickly cover the non-domestic RHI before moving on to what we're doing next on the Green Gas Support Scheme. So the government has been supporting biomethane injection into the gas grid via the non-domestic RHI since 2014. That has led to around 14 terawatt hours of biomethane being injected. And in 2019, that looked like about 3.6 terawatt hours altogether. As of last month, we had 95 accreditations on the scheme for biomethane, with a number of tariff guarantees and people that had just recently applied. That scheme is now closing at the end of this month, and we issued a government response and a statutory instrument in January to put that into place. But we're not going to leave it there. So first of all, there is the opportunity for people to apply for a tariff guarantee by the end of this month, and for biomethane injection will then have an additional year before they commission. And during that year, it is our ambition to then launch its replacement scheme. So firstly, then, let me take a step back just briefly. Colleagues elsewhere in BES have been working on, as Nicolette mentioned, a biomass strategy, which is going to a call for evidence quite soon. That will tell us what the best use of all of those biomass feedstocks is, whether it's heat or transport or industrial use or something else. those biomass feedstocks are precious and are very important for decarbonisation for meeting our 2050 goals, but obviously we can only use them once. So it's important that we understand at this point what that looks like. And the intention is we have a call for evidence which should be launched quite soon. And then the strategy that would be a first announcement this autumn, and then the strategy itself will be launched next year. There is also the a heat and building strategy that was mentioned, which will be launched shortly, and that will help to guide what we're going to be doing next in terms of our decarbonisation of those sectors. In the meantime, what we've wanted to do is progress with our low regrets options, and that's where biomethane fit in. We know that biomethane can have a role to play in decarbonising heat into homes and industry, etc. So we wanted to launch something quickly to replace the RHI just for that sector. It's only going to be a 4-year scheme with the intention of having something much longer term to replace it once we've got that clarity on from the biomass strategy. So the GGSS, the Green Gas Support Scheme, will be launching this autumn for 4 years. The goal for that is, along with the tail end of the non-domestic RHI, to triple. Oh, can people please mute? I'm getting a terrible echo. Thank you. So can people please mute? Sorry. Thank you. Okay, sorry about that. So the goal from the Green Gas Support Scheme is to triple biomethane in the grid over the life of the scheme, from where we are currently to 2045. Now, we want to learn from the RHI so that the replacement scheme is much more certain for investors and also better value for money. So what you'll see in there is some familiar elements from the RHI so that investors know what they're getting themselves into. It's a tariff support scheme. It has tiering, it'll have tariff guarantees, etc. But you'll also see some improvements in there to make it better value for money, but they're all still subject to ministerial and parliamentary approval. The government response on that scheme should be very soon as well. The one main difference is that it's going to be funded by a green gas levy. So it's not being funded by taxpayers, it's being funded on gas bill payers. So I've mentioned the biomass strategy. So that's going to be a call for evidence launch, and I can't really reiterate the importance of that. So I'll just close by saying to please respond to that call for evidence when it comes out in the next few weeks, so that we can really be clear and determine what we're going to be doing going forwards over the next 30 years towards our decarbonisation goals.
Thank you very much, Jane. I think that was very helpful. I also see that we have the first questions already in the chat. Before going there, Chris, having heard Nicolette and Jane, would you have one or two observations or questions to them that you would like to share?
So yeah, Nicolette, thank you very much. Good presentation. So one of the questions I have is around the consideration of blockages in supply chains and ensuring timely direction to ensure that customers are not exploited by those constraints in supply chains of the future. Is that part of the consideration of the overall hydrogen strategy?
So some colleagues in BES are also looking, as I mentioned, at the affordability cost. So it's going to look, how the consumer is going to be not taxed, but how the consumer is going to have to pay for these services. I'm not really like the specialist in the area, but I'm happy to take away that question and get someone to come back to you on it with more details, if that would help, Chris.
Yeah, that would be very helpful. I think it comes to that broader question around you've got to start the question by looking at the specifics, and it sort of takes me actually to my question to Jane, which is around the biomass strategy. And again, there is a lot of interactions between different uses of biofuels, and at some point you want a free and open market around the use of that product, but at the same time you need to stimulate but also prevent. How do you see legislation coming into that area, Jane?
Interesting question. I think free market is it's a good word, but it's not the full picture, because a free market would suggest that we let anybody use feedstock for anything they like, and in reality we're going to have to make sure that firstly other issues around feedstocks are dealt with, so water quality, biodiversity, air quality, etc. So one of the complicating factors that we've had with the Green Gas Support Scheme is trying to make sure that ammonia emissions that come from digestate, which is an unavoidable byproduct of anaerobic digestion, are managed as well as they possibly can be. And the feedstock that you put in has a huge impact on the ammonia that comes out of the other side. And there I am sure other complicating factors in other uses of those feedstocks too. There's also, of course, land use. So, with energy crops, there's this enormous debate, which I am not part of, thankfully, but which DEFRA colleagues, of course, are absolutely at the centre of, around what land should be used for, whether it's for energy or for food or for something else. So I don't see there being a completely open free market. There'll have to be some restrictions on what things can be used for. And we as government will also want to focus where we subsidise things. So we will be focusing our subsidies and or regulations, however it is that we want to incentivise the use of those feedstocks, onto those areas where we see there being a strategic importance in order to deliver those carbon benefits from the feedstocks.
Lovely, thank you, Jane.
Thank you very much. And I see we have quite some questions from the participants too. So let's start covering these. It's quite a lot. So I encourage everybody to keep their answers relatively short so that we can do a lot of questions. The first question, I think, is either for Jane or for Nicolette. Can any additional insight be provided on the expected changes to the Gas Act and its timing?
Yes, I'm happy to take that question, Kel. So the team is currently working on looking, at the changes that are going to be required for Gas Act, and one of the things that they're planning to do is to consult. I know that the plans would be probably to consult after the summer, but in terms of exact timing, we haven't got that yet. But obviously, we will keep the group updated on that.
Thank you. Then I think the next question is for you, Chris. It refers to the nice graphic explaining that 298 terawatt hours would go to buildings. And the question is how that would tie in with 600,000 heat pumps installed a year, which is a stated government target, versus the use of hydrogen in domestic heating. The question being, what is Gasco's Green's position on the use of hydrogen in domestic heating?
So, what we believe is that you need hydrogen in domestic houses for heating in order to meet the net zero target. And particularly when you look at the quality of the housing stock that we have in the UK and the requirements that would be in order to put heat pumps in many of those houses. But we see the two things going hand in hand in that there isn't a single technology solution. We don't see all of the households that currently burn natural gas burning hydrogen in the future, but there will be a balance between putting hydrogen in the homes, putting heat pumps in the homes, and also the opportunity to put hybrid heat pumps. And the work that Wales and the West did down in Bridgend, looking at hybrid systems, I think is a helpful dynamic, but also looking at compact hybrids along with UK Power Networks to try and get the best optimum solutions for customers. And at the end of the day, it's what works best for the customers.
And Chris, how would you relate it to the no new gas connection for new homes from 2025?
So this is one of the well, it's both a challenge and opportunity, and we'll see what comes out of the building strategy. But if you're going to put heat pumps in the home, then homes are best designed for those heat pumps with the right amount of insulation, thermal efficiency, with a radiator system that is designed for low temperature flows as opposed to the current high temperature flows. So heat pumps, as long as people are prepared to pay more for that higher specification house than is currently built in the UK, then heat pumps into new houses is a great source of decarbonising heat.
And then maybe the next one, thank you, Chris. The next one for Nicolette. What's the current thinking on mandating hydrogen-ready boilers from 2025, to the extent that you can answer it?
I think at this stage, I'd probably refer again to the team who is specialised in that area.
Okay. Then question, I think either for Nicolette or for Jane, potentially for Chris. Emily would be interested to hear comments from the panel on whose role they see it being to engage with the public on the need to change to lower carbon systems in their homes, and which options they'll have locally for gas, etc. Is that government? Is that local government? Is that retailers? Is it GDNs? Is it DNOs? Who would it be?
So if I kind of start, my view of the answer to that question is it's actually all of those. But what we need to be able to do is demonstrate to customers what their options are and when those options can be fulfilled. And one of the challenges at the moment is being able to give people a clear pathway as to so that you can engage them in that delivery of net zero, and so that people can make their choices. And that's one of the benefits of mandating hydrogen ready boilers, is it delivers that optionality and therefore takes some of the pressure off the customer choice piece. And it also means that we are ready to convert and repurpose our system. So I think it is everybody's role to show the pathway to customers and when they need to be able to make choices in order to meet the net zero target.
Thanks, Jane. Did you want to add something, or do you just fully agree?
I completely agree. I think the different consumers will be reached better by different bodies.
Yeah.
So, you know, vulnerable customers will probably be better, will be reached better by local authorities, for example, or housing associations or people they trust. Whereas, you know, people who are really politically engaged will be much more receptive to messages from politicians. So I think it's actually everyone's responsibility.
Okay, thanks. I think the next question is for Chris, because it is about Gasco's Green strategic aims. It's encouraging to hear that there will soon be a call for evidence focused on the transitional cost impact for gas decarbonization from the domestic consumer perspective. Innovation actions often don't stack well initially with a positive SROI, which is an important metric under the RIO2 GD2. Should the principles of a fair cost distribution be a strong strategic aim of Gasco's Green beyond the current innovation actions? And is it maybe already, Chris?
So I think this comes down to working hand in hand with government and the regulator around what the business model framework is going to be in order to achieve that. What we want to do is offer the option around the most economic opportunity to deliver net zero, and that depends on how ultimately the policy comes together along with industry and regulators in that framework. And that's what we're hoping to see come through the hydrogen strategy document, which we're expecting, as was said, around June, July this year.
Okay, thanks. I think we'll be able to cover most, but not all questions, but I'm sure that ENA will provide an answer to the other questions too, or look into these and take them into consideration in their planning. But let's do a couple more. Jane, what is the rationale for choosing a consumer gas levy rather than across all taxpayers?
So this relates to it's the same rationale as ones that have been used on renewable electricity for a long time. So it's government's views that, as with electricity, it's appropriate for gas bill payers to fund decarbonisation of gas, because all customers will benefit from the wider benefits of reducing carbon emissions. So that's the approach that's been working very well on renewable electricity, and you know, we all have seen the huge change in the makeup from a carbon perspective of the electricity network. So it's something that we wanted to reflect and repeat for gas.
Okay, thank you. And then to any of you, I would say in a transition to net zero, many existing standards might have to change, and there might be a need for new standards. How can industry be more proactive to ensure that standards enable and accelerate the transition? Asks Sebastian. Who would like to take that question?
I'm happy to start the answer to that question. So obviously government is planning quite a lot of work in the background. And as I mentioned, you know, there's going to be a series of consultations and calls for evidence and publication of strategies as well on in the next few months. So the way to do that is really to ask the various networks, but also the consumer groups, etc., for their views, so that we can build that into future policy making. I don't know whether Jane and Chris, you've got anything else to add?
No, I'd agree with that. And I think, so for me, you know, we talked about, or I talked about how much has been achieved in the year. I think setting out that clear policy ambition that the government has done sort of really allows people then to focus on and so what do we need to do? And so my view is, you know, industry understand the standards and the policies and the procedures, and it's for us to embrace that direction and show that we understand what needs to be done.
Thank you. And then I see a comment from Jonathan basically saying that it's surprising that the Gas Goes Green's projected energy end use in buildings doesn't seem to account too much for energy efficiency. But I also see Ron saying that the UK government COVID-related strong advice on the importance of building, ventilating, opening windows needs to be taken into account for future heating systems. And let's not discuss these two. I think these are two factors pointing to the other direction, but the joint question is, so what would be the energy use that would need to be provided for buildings? So that's, I think, something to take home. And then let's close off with, as last question, Peter Bingham's question: what are the blockers to building an electrolyzer and injecting green hydrogen into the NTS today in helping the transition towards a 20% blend? Nicolette or Chris, which one of you would like to take that one?
Yeah, let me take that one. So essentially there are two blockers. The first one is the gas safety management regulations, and the specification of gas limits hydrogen to 2%. So we need the changes to the gas safety management regulations. And the second is an economic driver, which is around, you need the framework where somebody's going to pay the price difference between methane and electrolyzed hydrogen.
Okay. Thank you very much, and thank you, Nicolette, Jane, and Chris, to be available for this panel. I think this really was a good way to start this session, and also the advisory group for 2021 with a great introduction on many things that are going on. Obviously, what ENA will do with the results of all these discussions, all the questions asked and the answers given, is see how they fit in the program. And I hope that was also informative for all the people participating in this call. So once again, a big thank you for you. Having said that, let's see what happened within Gas Goes Green since the last meeting. And for that, Tom, could you give us a brief update, please?
Sure, thanks, Michael. And just to echo that, thanks, Chris, Nicolette, and Jane for that great scene setting. So yes, wanted to first sort of take a brief look back, an update on what's happened since our last meeting. So we launched the Entry Customer Forum and have been meeting monthly since then. This forum brings together biomethane producers, the gas networks, equipment manufacturers, and other stakeholders to raise any issues relating to gas entry, and then work together to address any challenges and blockers there. And proposals have been received from all types of members. We've received a dozen or so far. 3 or 4 of those have been resolved, and we are collaboratively working through the rest. The resolved issues include a joint position on the approach for in-grid compression, and also an agreed approach for overcoming inconsistencies in some of the gas PTO evaluation tests. So various items being standardized across the gas networks are also close to completion, and we are communicating those through the Entry Customer Forum. So that's an important development over the last couple of months that we are pleased with, and pleased that that's progressing, and will continue throughout this year. Towards the end of last year, we also co-signed an open letter to the Prime Minister along with UK boiler manufacturers, calling for the government to mandate that any new boiler installed should be hydrogen ready from 2025. And we're looking forward to the consultation later this year, pending the outcomes of hyperheat, as Robin noted in the chat. And then in January, we published Britain's Hydrogen Network Plan. And I do hope you had a chance to look through that. This brings together the detail of the work being undertaken and planned by gas network companies in relation to hydrogen in one go-to plan, matching it with 4 key principles that we've identified to guide the work of the networks in bringing forward the hydrogen transformation. So those guiding principles are to ensure people's safety, to maintain security of supply, to focus on people's needs and what they want from gas and from energy, and delivering jobs and investment. Michael, if you can just flick on to the next slide, please. So though that was a sort of look back, a bit of a look ahead. Here you can see 2 pieces of work from last year that are soon to conclude. So the first, the development of the pathway to net zero. This is really, we wanted to revisit the 2019 pathway that formed the basis of Gas Goes Green, that shared pathway, and show how, well, consider some of the assumptions that have gone into that, and see whether there is new evidence that could be used to update any of that, to show in numbers how we are progressing to the balanced energy system that we have in mind, as Chris alluded to, that future role we see in heat, for example, of both heat pumps and hydrogen, depending on the type of house or property. So this piece of work shows how through a balanced scenario we can meet 2050 climate obligations and emissions reduction obligations, but also shows how we meet the interim carbon budgets to 2050 without compromising supply or risking blackouts. And this has been done through modelling, which we'll be looking to share soon. We also have a transport project concluding. So the transport decarbonisation pathway study follows on from our top level 2019 study, and that modelled the role of green gases in decarbonising the GB-wide economy. And for this project, we wanted to sort of do a deep dive into the transport sector. So particularly looking at trucks. And we see the transport sector, but again, particularly HGVs, is a real key enabler and area where green gas and biomethane in the short term especially has significant room to grow and enable those later stages of the transition more widely. So we'll be looking to publish that soon, and we are organising a webinar to explore that report in more detail, so stay tuned for news on that. And that nearly brings us up to date. I did want to mention the Gas Goes Green new site that Chris mentioned. So we've seen a lot of new awareness, raised awareness about hydrogen. And as we are on a steep learning curve, we want to both understand its role ourselves, but also help to ensure that the facts needed for people to have an informed view about that are available. So we set up this page, which I posted the link in the chat to, showing how hydrogen might look in people's homes, and answering some of the basic questions there. And we'll be looking to add to this with more evidence and more perspectives throughout this year. So before I move up to discuss the deliverables we have planned for this year, I wanted to come back to this shared pathway that underpins Gas Goes Green. The illustration here is our high-level plan to how we get to net zero, the shared pathway that I've mentioned. And this was informed by our 2019 Pathways to Net Zero report. And indeed, I know many of you were involved in the workshops that helped shape that as well. So our work for this year delivers against this pathway. As Chris alluded to, most of the work that we have for this year focuses on steps 1 and 2. So that is planning and research. So we have that understanding of what we need to know to enable the transition as a whole, but also then growing the work and the focus we have on facilitating connections. So doing more to support biomethane connections, but also looking to other green gas sources. On the next slide, you can see the various deliverables we'll be undertaking throughout the year. I won't take you through those now. I'll instead pass back to Mikhail, who's going to introduce representatives from the gas networks to take you through each of these.
Thank you, Tom. And I think the intention is to continuously over the year use this slide to see where we are in terms of progress for all these deliverables, right? And at the end of the year, hopefully everything is marked as delivered. That's the intention, isn't it?
That's the goal. And also we'll sort of hyperlink through this to the report, so it's an easy way to find the different reports and findings and outputs here.
Okay, let's do a very brief intermezzo. Meanwhile, asking some attention for something on. Loveland put in the chat the Welsh Government Wales hydrogen pathway consultation closing date April 9th. Let's not discuss it here, but if you want to provide input, there's a link in the chat. Having said that, let's go back to the slide at hand, and basically what we will be doing until 11:30 is we will talk through each of the 6 work streams. A representative from the networks will do that for each of the work streams. The question will be to briefly do that and to focus mainly on the impact it has for all the stakeholders here. And after that introduction, there will be the opportunity to ask a couple of questions. Obviously, we'll see, depending on time, how many we can take during the session, but any question or suggestion in the chat will be considered afterwards. Having said that, let's go to work stream 1, which is about investing in net zero. And there I would like to introduce Greg Dodd, who is head of strategic planning at Northern Gas Network. What is workstream 1 going to do, Greg? But more importantly, what will be the impact or the benefits for the participants of the advisory group?
Thank you, Mikhail, and good morning, everyone. So workstream 1 focuses on investing in net zero, and this incorporates specifically the range of projects that the networks have included as part of their net zero ambitions, both within the RIIO2 business plans, but also future investments that we've identified that can be progressed through the net zero funding framework that Ofgem established in consultation with the networks over the past 12 months. Main aim of this work stream is to progress projects that we can kind of execute now that will demonstrate and provide further evidence for the role that gas networks have in delivering a cost-optimal route to achieving net zero as part of that balanced energy system that that the panel and Tom have just outlined. So key deliverables, as you can see from the slide there, is progressing the ENA whole system strategy for delivering net zero by 2050. And the purpose of this is to frame a number of scenarios that could form the basis of that future system. And in addition, we'll consider that the policy and regulatory changes that would need to be implemented to enact that change. And I think those key developments will be of key interest to this panel. We'll also review the zero carbon commitment that was published in spring last year. This is in light of the publication of the recent final determinations from Ofgem, and we'll use the updated information that we now have and those funding routes to reforecast the trajectory of those commitments and the implementation of what we'd plan to do. And finally, a further interest to this panel will be progressing the local, regional and national engagement and planning activities and studies to develop implementation pathways for achieving net zero across the range of energy vectors, and importantly understanding how this will vary across different sectors and also geographically in the UK, because as has been said a number of times through these calls, there's no one solution for the UK because of that geographic variability. So in terms of the importance of delivering these now, the key aspect is we progress this work stream because the outcome of that investment research and planning really does set the context for the future investment that we need over the subsequent years, price controls kind of from our regulatory framework to deliver those net zero ambitions for the UK energy sector, and importantly through Gasco's Green, identifying the role that energy or gas networks will play in facilitating that change.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Greg? Virtually raise your hand or just speak up, I would say. Then I would have one. So Greg, I'm imagining that I would be, let's say, an industrial consumer. And at this moment, so many options are still feasible. How is the work of Workstream 1 going to help me to know what to bet on as a decarbonisation option?
So Workstream 1 will bring together those commitments, the planning across the network, so no single network planning in isolation of the other. I think that's one of the beauty of Gasco's Green and the work the ENA is doing, is bringing together that collaborative body of work to gather that evidence and demonstrate how we can implement the various projects over the course of RIIO2, which is a period 2021 to 26 initially, but then off the basis of that, what are the follow-on projects? So this is the first 5 years in the context of a 25-30 year strategy. So really important that we gather that evidence now.
Okay. Thank you very much. I see another question, which is from Victoria. Go ahead.
Hi there, it's Victoria Mustard from Exoserve here. I was just wondering if there has been any thoughts or plans put in place to have a look at the funding for how overall industry standards are going to have to change, and things like modifications to UNC with regards to these projects, and obviously moving forward, hopefully when the projects come to full fruition.
Thanks, Victoria. The answer is yes. We've got a number of working groups established through the ENA, and one of those specifically is recently discussed identifying a specific resource to look at this on behalf of all of the energy networks. So it's something that's very front of mind. Obviously, a fairly significant piece of work, and something that will be progressing over the next the next couple of months, really, in terms of getting that resource in place, and then implementing the program of work that needs to engage with relevant stakeholders, but also deliver the change that we need to.
Fantastic. That's great to hear. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Greg, for this great introduction. Let's continue with Workstream 2, which will be introduced by Colin Thompson, Energy Futures Managers at SGN. What can you tell us about the workstream 2 work, gas quality and safety, and how that is relevant for the participants of the advisory group?
Thanks, Mikael. Yeah. Thanks, Mikael. Hopefully you can hear me.
Yes.
Yeah, Colin Thompson, SGN. Yeah, so the workstream 2.1. Yeah, I mean, following on from the trials that are underway and have taken place on high deploy, and also has been mentioned before, the government's commitment to blending in the 10-point plan for green industrial revolution. This deliverable will certainly set out the gas network's vision for introducing hydrogen blends into the network. So we're looking to develop within the product a timeline setting out the impact and opportunities on green gas producers and customers. So that's really one of the aims, and I think that's what will be of interest to the advisory group here. So the project itself will be split into 3 different phases. Phase being high level of possible blending rollout models, and looking at the legislative and renewables into the gas network to meet those targets that have been outlined in the 10-point plan. And the output from that, the timeline will support the industry in developing a plan to enable new gases entering the network, such as facilitating the increase in biomethane. So it's not all just about hydrogen. We are looking and considering the impact and opportunities for biomethane injection. We'll look at the changes required around GSMR to facilitate that greater volume of hydrogen blending, where we're limited at the moment through GSMR, up to a maximum of 20% hydrogen by volume into the network. We'll also look at some elements of the UNC and license, and maybe the high level market framework that's required there with the implementation of blending in the network. And it's also worth noting that we'll certainly look at some of the secondary impacts that will need to be addressed with the potential market framework, and that could include system changes that are required. Phase 2, we'll take a little bit more of a deep dive into a feasibility study on the possible blending locations, and that will certainly help support possible options for blending into the network, and again help developers and consumers about locations for blending of hydrogen into the network. And thirdly, the last phase will certainly look to undertake an industry consultation on the project findings, but we'll certainly be engaging with stakeholders throughout the project to gather thoughts and feedback on how we're progressing with the product throughout the year. Thanks, Mikael.
Thank you, Colin. And how will this impact the different stakeholders that are part of this advisory group? How will they benefit from this? What's the bigger goal? Why is this relevant?
Yeah, I think the bigger goal is that it will set out I suppose an understanding, clearly understanding of the challenges and how we can overcome some of those challenges for blending in the network. And as I say, we'll set out that timeline of when we see things need to happen with that regulatory and legislative changes, but also that will certainly will help stakeholders. We'll take advice from stakeholders and feedback. It also links into the BEIS blending group as well, and some of the requirements that have been asked from that group. So we'll work closely and align with the opportunities there to produce those outputs for that group as well.
Thank you. And Julie wonders, does this work focus on distribution or transmission, or both, Colin?
Both. Both is the short answer, Julie. Yes.
Okay. Good. Thank you very much. If there are no further questions to Colin, if so, speak up now, please. There's another one. Will this cover changes needed to the FWA-VC regime to accommodate more biomethane and hydrogen, Colin?
Yes. Yeah, we'll look at the flow weighted average calculation as part of the thermal energy regulations and the implications there for changes in lower carbon gases entering the network. Yeah, so it will form part of the project as well.
Okay, thank you. Other questions still before moving on? Then let's move on. And Lennart, maybe you can take over facilitation, the same for workstream 3 and 4.
Yes, thank you, Michiel, and thank you, Colin, for your clarification. Next, I would like to invite Danielle Stewart, who is long-term strategy manager at National Grid, to present the work for the plan for workstream 3, consumer options, asking her to focus on the impact and relevance of these deliverables to the stakeholders present in this meeting. Danielle, you can take about 3 minutes to present the plan, and then we do still encourage the participants to pose your questions in the chat for Danielle, or to raise your hand, or if the meeting allows for it, just to speak up. Danielle, go ahead.
Great, thank you, Leonard, and good morning, everybody. So I'm going to talk you through workstream 3, which is all about consumer options. So we know that decarbonisation of the gas grid is going to impact industrial, commercial and domestic consumers in different ways. So by working together across the energy networks and with industry, power, transport and heating sectors, we can support consumers to meet their own decarbonisation ambitions whilst ensuring that smooth and just transition. So the deliverables in this workstream will evaluate the implications on consumers of net zero compliant gases, as well as those whole system interfaces. We have 4 deliverables in this workstream this year, which I'll take you through now. So the first one is around cost to the consumer. So our hydrogen and net zero cost to the customer research series has so far analysed the upstream, the midstream and the downstream costs of establishing a hydrogen economy. And that's between now through to 2050. Last year we published the first cost to customer report in May, and then we had an updated version in November. So for 2021, we're proposing a further update to our analysis, including updates to several key assumptions, such as conversion costs to distribute hydrogen, as well as considering new scenarios, such as those from the Climate Change Committee's 6th Carbon Budget recommendations back in December. So why now, and why is it of interest to the group? So we know the cost of inaction is high and could increase total overall costs, and also put the UK's ability to hit the net zero target at risk. So the sooner investment is made into critical infrastructure, the greater and the timelier the return on investment will be. So understanding those costs and benefits of moving to a hydrogen economy is going to be critical, alongside those clear signals and frameworks from government to unlock the necessary capital. So the second deliverable is all around proposed licensing regime for industrial clusters. So while the operation of a large-scale pipeline today is a licensed activity, the likely business models to support hydrogen as a fuel and the initial unconnected nature of the various industrial clusters means that the current gas system arrangements may not be suitable for hydrogen. So this deliverable will evaluate whether the existing licenses are adequate, whether we need new licenses. It will review the roles and responsibilities for the network companies involved too. Alongside this, we're also proposing to share more information on the possible role of gas networks in supporting industrial decarbonisation in general. So that's both within the industrial clusters, but also outside of the industrial clusters. Again, why is it important? So we've already mentioned today, so the government's 10-point plan included a target for completion of testing of a 20% blend of hydrogen in distribution networks by 2023. But we also believe that we'll start to see some of the early hydrogen production coming from those industrial clusters. So to maximise the benefits of blending in a timely way, the necessary licence and regulatory frameworks are going to need to develop alongside all the physical testing that we're doing. So the third deliverable is around decarbonising off-grid communities. So we're going to undertake an assessment of whole system decarbonisation options for off-grid gas communities. As well as gaining a better understanding of emissions reductions that could be delivered, this work will also provide analysis of any impact on fuel poverty. Again, why now? So according to our Pathway to Net Zero study, the next 5 years are going to be critical to building that evidence base for hydrogen, but also to facilitate green gas connections to the gas network. So we're going to need to ensure no one gets left behind in the transition, and it's important that we understand all options for off-grid communities. And then the final deliverable in this work stream is the impacts of reducing gas demand. So the project will demonstrate the role of gas networks in a credible scenario that sees heat and transport energy delivered through alternative vectors such as electrification. So under this scenario, much of the gas network may need to be decommissioned, and this deliverable would develop a bespoke modelling tool that will provide a robust view on network decommissioning costs, and it will take into consideration the full range of network assets as well as wider social and economic implications. Again, why now and what are the benefits? Very much related to the first deliverable. understanding of the true costs of different pathways is going to be critical to informing government policy, regulations and frameworks that can provide that clear direction to get us to net zero. Thank you, Leonard.
All right, thank you, Danielle. We do have a couple of questions popping in the chat. First of all, Chiara, who indicates that she'd be happy to be a contact for this workstream. Good to note. And Julie asks, how does this work look at the ACER work and on when and how to regulate hydrogen networks?
Great question. So we're very early in looking at how this work will play out, particularly for the licensing regime. But absolutely, we will need to look at the work that ACER is doing and regulation too. Stuart Easterbrook is currently helping to scope this particular piece. So I don't know whether Stuart's got anything to add, but I can take that away if not.
No, I think that's right, Danielle. Yeah, so we will, in kicking off that piece of work, we will look at all the existing work that's out there that can help us work out what the options are.
Okay, thank you, Danielle and Stuart. We have Laura Brown asking, how do we prevent capacity baggers securing all the connections capacity?
Absolutely. Just reading through the rest of the message there. So
right. So this prevents access for local authorities and community groups, traditional slower to mobilize, and has a very undesirable consequence of a secondary market in resale of connection agreements.
Absolutely. So these are the sorts of things that we're going to need to consider. So alongside the frameworks, we need to look at connections arrangements. We need to look at the contracts that we need to put in place. So this is part of the scope of some of this work. So again, good question, but that's something that we will be looking at. I'm very happy to engage with you, Laura, directly if you want to discuss that further.
All right. Do we have any other questions? Yes, we do. Will the industrial clusters be fully responsible for updating, refurbishment, or laying the pipelines that are off the national grid, which are owned by industries?
So not fully responsible. I think there'll be various players involved in that. So I know that within the industrial clusters at the moment, there are a number of people that are collaborating, different organisations that are responsible for different parts of this. So absolutely, the gas networks are going to see what their role is, but it doesn't mean that all pipelines will necessarily come within the gas network's responsibility, or necessarily the industrial cluster's responsibility. We're going to need to work together.
All right, thank you, Danielle. We have one final question in the chat, and then I think it's time to move on to workstream 4. Will you also look at connections being shared and risk allocation between members of clusters?
Absolutely, yeah. So that will be within scope of the work that we need to do in the licensing again.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Danielle, for your presentation, and thank you all for participating actively in the chat. Given the time, I think it would be wise to move on to workstream 4. We still have one question coming up in the chat. Please, we are noting these questions and they will be considered after the meeting. With that, I would like to invite Stuart Easterbrook, who we've also just heard very briefly, and who is a future gas strategy manager at Cadent, to present the impact and relevance of the work plan of the workstream for system enhancement. Stuart, go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Hi everyone. So this work stream is looking at what we can do in the shorter term to support net zero and to reduce emissions. And there's 3 areas that the work stream is looking at. The first one is supporting green gas producers. Tom alluded to it earlier, the establishment of the Entry Customer Forum. So that forum will continue and is a forum set up so that developers, operators of green gas plants or biomethane plants, the networks and other industry stakeholders can identify issues and opportunities, discuss them, prioritise them, and take actions to remedy them. And that helps to remove barriers for new projects and also to reduce the costs, which is also another potential barrier for both the connection and the ongoing operation of those plants. So we're also looking at there on one of the issues that cropped up in one of the early conversations about flow weighted average and thermal energy regs. So biomethane plants have issues around the CV and flaring and propionation, which all are driven by the thermal energy regs. So improvements in that space can make a significant impact and can support a step change in green gas going forwards. The second area is sort of building on the biomethane work is recognising that there's a large chunk of biogas that's currently produced but is burnt fairly inefficiently in gas engines. So it's not cleaned up for various reasons put on the gas network, but it's burnt to make electricity. There's a piece of work looking at what the barriers are as those projects reach the end of either their subsidy lives or their technical lives, to see how we can remove barriers to encourage those projects to rather than burn it to make electricity, but to get that gas cleaned up and get it onto the gas network. The final area is looking at fugitive emissions. So this is gas that's escaping from the network. The vast bulk of that is related to leakage, which will be addressed by sort of the ongoing mains replacement program. So what this piece of work is looking at is the other areas. While small in comparison, are still significant. So a lot of it is around gas that's vented or leaked from our above ground installations. So the networks are looking at how we can share best practice, what the options are, the cost benefit analysis of all those options, common methodologies, and also what we can do with the shrinkage model, which drives sort of the commercials around leakage. So some important work in that work stream as well. That's it for work stream 4. Any questions?
All right, thank you, Stuart. We already have a question in the chat from Jonathan. Should there be an obligation for network investment ahead of need in upstream compression of gas to help free up system capacity?
Yeah, no, thanks, Jonathan. No, that's a really good question, and it's something that we've been looking at, how we encourage investment on the network to support green gas. Because at the moment, if people are familiar with the process, you always have to find existing spare capacity to get an economic connection. And we're looking at what the networks can do to create more flexible capacity. So the obvious option for that is that you install compressors in the distribution network and start to move the gas around. And you could either do that as a sort of reactive reinforcement or action associated with a new project, or maybe you could do it strategically as well. So there's a review that's starting off looking at how we can change the commercial regime so that we can support that. And we built it, and all the networks have put uncertainty mechanism in our EO2 price controls, so that if we need funding to do that, there are mechanisms to unlock that. So that won't be a barrier either.
Thank you, Stuart. We also have a question from Jane, one of our panelists, who is very interested in the CHP conversion study and is curious about the timing on that.
Some of the other colleagues on the call might know the exact times. I know we've just in the process of kicking off a piece of innovation work to try to develop the thinking in that space. So I think that's live. I don't know if Greg or somebody has got some more up-to-date information on the timescales for that piece of work. If not, we can share it afterwards.
No, sorry, Stuart, not to hand. Sorry.
All right, thank you. One final question in the chat. Stuart, will it be useful to have BASE in this work stream as well? Given that the GGSS excludes CHP conversions in it, would be useful to have their input on the type of evidence they would need to reconsider supporting these plans. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, no, totally agree. I mean, we're doing this so that we can support government policy. So yeah, absolutely.
All right, great. Okay, finally, closing it off with a final question. CHP, Stuart, you mentioned that CHP is relatively inefficient. Ian Calvert is curious to hear your reasoning behind this, as he states that it's actually the most efficient if you need heat and gas is still being used to make power.
Yeah, I mean, there will be some. I mean, it depends on the setup. You know, if you can make full use of the heat as well, then the efficiency will be higher. But this is sort of comparing if you put the gas and burn it in a domestic boiler, which can be upwards of 90% efficient, versus a gas engine, which is 30–40% efficient. More than that if you can use the heat.
Thank you for that clarification. And with that, thank you, Stuart, for presenting this work and or presenting this plan. With that, I would like to hand it back over to Michiel for the final 2 work streams.
Thank you, Leonard. Thank you, Stuart. Let's go to workstream 5, which is about hydrogen transformation. And for that, Matt Hindle, head of gas from ENA, can I invite you to talk through what you are going to do, but more importantly, how that is relevant, please?
Sure, and good morning, everyone. Thanks very much for joining us today. So workstream 5, hydrogen transformation, is all about the gas transmission and distribution activity to develop the evidence around the safety, the required quality and the cost of both developing hydrogen networks and particularly conversion of our existing networks. This brings together a huge amount of network, technical and feasibility style work across the 4 gas distribution networks and national grid transmission. We've got 2 key work areas for 2021, which you can see on the screen. And starting with the second of those, the connection agreements for hydrogen. So this is thinking ahead to there being widespread hydrogen connections onto the network. We want to make sure we've got the right procedures in place and that they're common across the networks to make it as easy as possible to connect producers. Development work on that will follow from the work which Colin described in workstream 2, looking at the timeline and requirements for blending. So it's going to be very much connected to that work, developing options for hydrogen blending and making sure then that we've got the right policies and procedures in place. We'll undertake detailed engagement, of course, with industry, with anyone with an interest in connecting to the network on that, and particularly through the Entry Customer Forum, which we've already mentioned. So please look out for detail on that later this year and get in touch with the team if that's something of particular interest to you or your organisations or members. On the first side, delivering the BEIS Industry Hydrogen Programme, that's a short phrase which encapsulates an awful lot of work. And if we can just move on to the next slide, please, Mikhail. The Hydrogen Network Plan, which Tom mentioned at the start, was published at the end of January and really sets the kind of detail around everything that's sort of encapsulated in this work stream. So it's our blueprint for delivery of the hydrogen economy, but it links very directly, and this is why we describe this as delivering a joint programme between government and the networks. It sets out how we deliver those key ambitions across the 10-point plan and the Energy White Paper, blending hydrogen from 2023, linking to that work under workstream 2, workstream 2.1, developing industrial clusters and the work the networks need to do to facilitate 2 industrial clusters by the middle of the decade and 4 by 2030, supporting hydrogen producers, both for blended and dedicated hydrogen networks, and developing the hydrogen town by the end of the decade, which is very much reliant on the work the networks are collaborating on around trialling and piloting of hydrogen. On the next slide, if we just dive into a tiny bit more detail on that in the time we have available today. We've taken the approach in the plan to come at this very much from the customer perspective. So thinking about the core user groups, potential user groups for hydrogen, households in the case of hydrogen for heating, heavy industry, particularly around those clusters, power generation and the role of hydrogen across the energy system, and transport, particularly heavier transport. Through the plan and through this work, you have our 4 key tenets which underpin everything that we're doing. So how we deliver safely, how we ensure that we maintain security of supply that we need through the transition and in the longer term, how we focus on the needs of consumers in each of those groups, and how we develop the right supply chain through all of this work. And you can see on here, we've tried to map the projects which are developing that evidence across those tenets to those key end use groups. So thinking about safety, clearly that underpins all of the work on the engineering transition that's required across distribution and transmission networks. And in the case of the household users, there's a particular link to the High for Heat programme in terms of the use of hydrogen in domestic and small commercial settings. On security of supply, thinking about the sort of modelling projects, which again underpin all of the potential users for hydrogen, alongside work developing market frameworks and directly thinking about how we connect the hydrogen producers. Through our customer focused work, we start to sort of break down the use areas a bit more. So on the domestic side, the trials meeting the needs, meeting the ambitions set out in the 10-point plan to build from the H100 project, which is delivering that neighbourhood scale trial, through larger scale trials and pilots to ultimately support the delivery of a hydrogen town. On the industry side, working very closely with the potential industrial clusters in each region around how we can support those directly, and also link in the potential use of blending to support those producers. And then across power and transport too, thinking about the roles those can play and how those integrate with a range of the network projects. And the supply chain is absolutely crucial across all of this, both in terms of the readiness for hydrogen within the networks, so building up our own teams and training, but of course more broadly the role of networks in the development of the UK's hydrogen economy, the UK's hydrogen ambitions, is very much as the facilitator for markets, facilitator for production markets, and also for the domestic side. So we see ourselves as being in the centre of that story, but ensuring through our programmes of work that we have the right supply chain, the right skills base, the right training in place to facilitate those markets, develop the right supply, both of equipment and skilled people, skilled jobs, in order to deliver our ambitions and the UK's ambitions more broadly. And of course, our stakeholder engagement and communication is really crucial to that, and we'll be talking about that in a bit more detail in the next work stream as well.
Thank you, Matt. Are there any questions to Matt about the hydrogen transformation work stream?
Stunned silence, Mikhail.
I guess you covered it all. Then thank you, Matt. Oh, there is a question. The plan maps out really well a great deal of the activities required. In this plan, there isn't reference to policy, regulation, or economics. This will be needed to take a whole systems approach rather than purely technical. Is a remark for your reflection.
Thanks, Laura. I don't fully agree because we do have some enablers mapped, particularly in terms of policy development. So hydrogen ready boilers from the mid 2020s on the domestic side, policy around carbon capture and storage, support for the business models for hydrogen producers on the production side. And we would link the kind of network investment story, building on the activity that's underway at the moment, very much to the need for both policy and regulatory enablers to support and target that investment. So I think that is there in the plan, but clearly it's also something which will be developed further and certainly developed in more detail through a lot of this work. So the market frameworks activity, for example, and similarly, sort of future of the mains replacement work, the feasibility around blending and the approach to blending. All of that and many more of the projects here will have implications in terms of the policy and regulation and the change that's required to support that. So in my view, it's there, but yes, there's certainly future development in those areas to come.
I see, good stuff. Thank you. So I guess you answered to Laura's liking. Having said that, let's go to the sixth and final work stream, which is about external affairs and stakeholder engagement. This would be covered by Ollie Lancaster, but unfortunately he had a last-minute agenda clash. But I'm sure Tom will be a worthy replacement. Tom.
Thanks, Mikhail. Yes, so with this work stream and its deliverables, we're looking to further understand the environmental, economic and social benefits of a decarbonised gas grid, further explore that. For the first one, the green gas and power generation data, here we recognised data as very important to this and to the overall work stream. And so that the first deliverable here is to build a reporting template and dashboard for regular updates to evidence the progress that the gas networks are making towards net zero, and in their enabling of renewable generation. It'll keep track of the percentage of metallic being replaced through the Iron Mains risk reduction program. And so through that, we'll be reporting on how hydrogen ready the network is. We're going to be compiling our green gas data, and this will include current numbers of AD sites, capacity of connected gas grid sites, additional capacity and sort of capacity that's in progress with the networks. And of course, as we heard earlier today, with the Green Gas Support Scheme being introduced later this year, that's expected to push the sector further on. We wanted to also report on distributed power generation that integrates gas and electricity. So we'll have figures on that. And making this information tangible is really the key here. We want to convey the impact of this. So, for example, if we've got figures or volumes of green gas, we want to translate that into the number of homes that gas is heating, or the number of homes that gas would be heating if that was supported with a hybrid heating system. We also want to include other stats, so looking at transport refueling stations, hydrogen blending, methane reformation, CHP connections, possibly also heat network connections. So as I said, we will compile a reporting template and see what we can initially do in this. But I think, as you'd appreciate, with lots of growth in this space, that's got the opportunity to grow and draw in other repositories of data as this carries on. For the other deliverable here, the piece you can see at the bottom of the slide here on defining a smart gas network. So here we wanted to look at the different processes that are in place today that the gas networks are doing smartly already, as well as looking ahead to innovation that will bring in additional smart aspects and smart operation of the gas network. So this will include things like pressure management that the networks are undertaking today to minimize leakage, and also compression as a potential way of overcoming grid congestion, and as we were discussing earlier, as a way of enabling more biomethane sites to connect, or those sites that are connected to increase their capacities. There's a lot of existing network material to draw from in this, and it's a great way of sharing learning throughout the industry on projects such as OptiNet or real-time networks that we've discussed previously in the Green Gas Advisory Group. but a way of drawing learning from those and sharing that. We're very keen to communicate this work once it's done to further establish gas within the smart grid space, but also to help articulate the benefits of the innovation and the investment that the gas networks are doing, and to also encourage more innovation in this space. So look forward to updating on those throughout the year.
Thanks, Tom. I see 3 questions in the chat, and we'll do all 3 of them. First one is Julie's, who has a more general question about the engagement across all work streams. With who, when, how will that be done? Tom?
So I think there might actually be another slide which sets out a timeline as to when we are looking to complete and undertake these pieces of work. So throughout the bars, we'll be engaging through the advisory group, but also on specific deliverables within each of the work streams. Some certainly lend themselves to workshops, and we'll be looking to utilize teams and other ways of gaining insights of those on the line and wider stakeholders. Certainly in some smaller meetings, some one-to-ones to help draw in and have more detailed discussions and get the expertise that we need in to build these deliverables. So throughout the year, really.
Julie, did that answer your question?
Not really, no. I think I'd like to see something a bit more specific, because it's easy. It's very general comments that have been made, and I understand that, but I think each work strand should probably be trying to identify who the key stakeholders are that need to be engaged with, because I guess my concern is, perhaps putting it a little bit bluntly, is that there's lots of good work here, but what I don't want to see is that we come back in 3 months' time and this is just all work that's been progressed by the networks without then involving other parties, as and where necessary, and things can be learnt and brought in, because there's a lot of expertise around the patch for that. And I don't feel that's come across very clearly. It was meant, well, we will talk to people, but, trying to put a bit more of a structure around that.
Cool. So
that people can feel involved rather than we're just not told the outcomes later on.
No, certainly, and there are detailed plans for engagement and how we'll use the people who are on the line today and the wider industry behind each of the deliverables. Just haven't shared that to be able to get through the content in the time we had, but certainly happy to share those plans for, as I say, the detail that sits behind these.
Okay, thanks. I think Fiona's question that this work stream is quite a catch-all, who are your stakeholders, is along the same lines. So let's not do that separately, if you allow me to. Let's go to Amelie's question, who remarks, I'm still not clear whether the Gas Goes Green program intends to carry out public engagement research, particularly about the domestic changes and choices. Moreover, any plans for specific engagements with communities who are going to be affected by the affordability issues? If this is done via individual GDNs, are learnings being shared to influence Gas Goes Green decisions? Tom, would you like to take that question? Is it for Danielle?
So to an extent, it will be picked up in the consumer work stream, but where the networks are engaging with their different innovation projects and particularly on the trials, they again have extensive engagement programs to ensure that views of customers and thinking about customers in terms of future generations of customers, that those are well considered. And there's a lot of research going on in that space to make sure that we understand how to take those views into account as a body of social science research.
Okay, and are learnings being shared?
Certainly between the networks, and there have been a lot of stakeholder events to disseminate that. Very keen to carry on supporting that from a Gas Goes Green perspective.
Okay, thanks. And then I think Jonathan has a question for Matt. The question being, looking further ahead, there may well be a potential green hydrogen supply from offshore structures necessitating new undersea or gas shipping transport infrastructure. Matt, are you looking at this? Yes or no, please?
The yes or no answer is yes, and particularly in the context of National Grid's future grid work, Jonathan.
Good. Then thanks all for this talk through and all your suggestions, feedback and questions on the work streams Gas Goes Green has for 2021. Now, obviously, the green gas is only part of the equation, part of the transition. The other relevant part being the transition of the electricity side. For that, ENA has a project too, which is the Open Networks project. Verena Ferreira is the head of the Open Networks project. She has spoken in August in this advisory group to update on her progress, but we thought it would be relevant to ask her again to share what is happening in the Open Networks project, so that we can all see both sides of the equation, and hope that this helps us all to have a whole systems thinking and to understand the whole system. With that, Verena, can you please talk us through what Open Networks is doing?
Thanks, Mikhail. Good morning, everyone. So as Mikhail said, I'll be talking to you today about the Open Networks project, which is a sister project for Gas Goes Green. So the project this year is now in its 5th year of delivery. We have recently published our work plan for this year. And as part of that, we've set out 24 different products with over 94 deliverables across the year. Just as a bit of a recap, so Open Networks is basically a cross-industry initiative that's looking at how the networks need to evolve to become a smart, flexible energy system. So through the work that we've done over the last 5 years, we have introduced real momentum into this transition. A lot of the focus of the work that we're doing on the project is on flexibility markets, looking at how we can open up these markets, how we can remove any barriers and help customers, including renewables, connect much faster to the grid. So recently we have seen we've heard from the government, we've seen some key publications that have given us some more clarity on decarbonization policy. So we very much welcome that. And through our work plan for this year, we will continue to help, deliver the smart grid of the future. If you go to the next slide, please. So in terms of our areas of work for this year, so it's broadly similar to what we had last year. So we have split up our work in the project across 6 different areas. So the best way to kind of explain this is, so the project is very much looking at the transition to distribution system operation. So we've got a separate work stream, which is our DSO transition work stream. So through this, we are kind of taking that longer term focus for looking at what's needed between now and 2050 to deliver that transition. So in parallel to that, recognizing that this transition is multifaceted and there are like a number of areas that need to be progressed, we've set up 4 different work streams that are looking at how we can, start making some of those changes now. So the focus of these work streams is very much on the short to medium term developments for DSO. So we've got one on flexibility services. So this is one of our largest areas of work. It's one of the areas of highest priority in the project. We've also got another area of work that's specifically looking at whole electricity system planning. So this work stream is looking across electricity transmission and distribution, and it's looking at how we can kind of, through more collaboration, how we can improve processes and make them more efficient. So kind of mirroring that, we've set up a relatively newer area of work in the project to look at whole energy systems. So the feedback that we got from stakeholders was that, we are looking at whole electricity system planning, but can we step a bit further and look at how expanding the focus of that and see how we can bring in gas networks into that. So 3 years ago, we agreed to setting up a separate work stream that will look at how electricity companies and gas companies can work more closely together to help improve processes in the short term. We have another work stream that looks more generally across connections in electricity, and we also have another work stream that looks at comms and stakeholder engagement. Next slide, please. So in terms of governance, so this year, for our whole energy systems work stream, we agreed to having dual governance with Gas Goes Green. So as part of that, we are making sure that, we're working closely with our ENA colleagues that are leading the Gas Goes Green project. We're taking account of development work as part of that to make sure, we are kind of aligned in the transition on that. Next slide, please. So in terms of what we've got set out for this whole energy systems work stream for this year, we've got 3 products that are focusing on three different areas. So the first one is a whole system CBA framework. So this is work that we started last year. So as part of this, we developed a model that helps you assess electricity and gas options to consider, which one on an overall basis is the more efficient one. So we will continue work on that this year to look at how we can further refine that. The next product that we have is looking at investment planning. So as part of this product, we are working on developing a whole system optioneering service. So through this service, you'd be able to work much more closely with the local authorities, give them the gas and the electricity input that would be needed to inform their local area energy planning. We also have another product that's looking at more coordinated approaches towards gathering regional data from local authorities, and also like how we can provide data in a more coordinated way to these local authorities. So this is what we've got set out in terms of our work for this year. If you go to the next slide, it just shows a timeline of what we're planning to deliver across each one of those products. I think in the time that we've got today, I'm not planning to step through all of that, but happy to take any questions on that. And then the final slide is just for so the final slide just has a few useful links. It's got a link to our project scope for this year. So that's the document where you can find the details on the 24 products that we mentioned across all of our work streams. So that's everything from me.
Thank you, Farina. I could well imagine that there are questions, and we have some time to take questions. So any questions or suggestion to Farina about the Open Networks program, please go ahead. Feel free to speak up or raise your hand. Then I am going to ask a more broad question, because today from the Gas Goes Green side, as well as from the Open Network side, we have been discussing the whole systems approach and the interplay and how both ENA initiatives are contributing and exploring and working through that. So obviously no need to repeat the elements that we have already heard. But are there maybe elements that we haven't heard yet and that you think should be included in a whole systems approach? Before going there, I see there's a question from Sebastian. Can you share the link to join the mailing list for the Open Networks mailing list, please? Farina, could you share that link?
Yeah,
good.
That.
Good, done. And I see there's a raised hand from Mike Foster. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, thank you. Just one bit I think is missing from the whole systems bit that's just been discussed, and one that seems to be fixating the Climate Change Committee and certainly some officials within BEIS, is where all of the green hydrogen is coming from, and that's their words, not mine. Despite that at ministerial level they are somewhat ambivalent as to whether it's green or blue hydrogen. Certainly the Climate Change Committee, in terms of what their narrative seems to be, and certainly individual officials within BEIS, we've heard referencing this lack of availability of green hydrogen. And I think we need to do a little bit more effort on making sure we've got that covered so that our critics can't use all of the other good work that's going on and say, well, it's complete wasted because there's not enough hydrogen to go around.
Who would like to give an answer to that suggestion? Srina or Matt?
Yeah, happy to come in if you want, Mikhail. Yeah, thanks, Mike. I think the questions and the development around hydrogen production is clearly a really crucial part of this year, and I think when we see the hydrogen strategy from BEIS later in this year, consultation around support schemes for hydrogen production. Clearly, we're looking for a lot of ambition to be set through those for green hydrogen as well as for blue, and blue particularly connected to the industrial clusters. I think from perspective of ENA in general, it's really important we have both the opportunities for green in terms of a technology that can support the energy system as a whole, and the links between gas and electricity and provision of flexibility, as well as clearly delivering a net zero form of gas are really important, really exciting. It's clearly also something that the UK has a particular interest in from perspective of our role in the global energy system as well. And I think announcements even today around offshore wind manufacturing have re-emphasised that. So very much share the ambition. I think it'll be a key focus this year. It's something we'll continue to build on through our work, thinking about the role of the networks as the facilitators of those markets, and through our work on looking at the system as a whole in workstream 1, and the work looking at the cost to consumers and the cost of the future energy system. I think we'll build more on that this year, but very much welcome any further ideas that you have, and anything we can work on collectively across the industry to support those developments.
Thanks, Matt.
Okay, any other element when looking from a whole systems approach that hasn't been mentioned, and that basically should be added on whatever side of the equation, but any other whole system approach element that anybody would like to add? Or any other question to Farina? Last opportunity for today. Then I think we can come to the conclusion that you're pretty complete and that your presentation was clear, Farina. Thank you very much for that. I see Ian is asking a question whether the slides will be distributed, because then all the links are clear. Tom, I guess that's a yes afterwards.
Yes, certainly.
Good. And then with that, I'm going to give the word to you, Tom, to close it off after having thanked everybody for the many inputs that we have received. So thank you for yet again contributing very actively and engaging in this session. That is what makes sessions like this. So thank you from our side, and Tom, for you to close it off.
Thanks, Mikhail. And just a quick word from me, really, to just reiterate what Mikhail said. Thanks to the speakers for taking us through the work we've got in store for the year ahead. And thanks to all members of the advisory group for giving up their time this morning. Looking forward to engaging with you throughout the year to draw in your views and help ensure that what we're doing and work in this space is as impactful as possible. Do take care, and we will see you all in a couple of months, but we'll certainly be communicating and keeping you up to date in the meantime. Many thanks all. Speak soon.
Thank you.